Good morning. Thanks for bearing with us as we get settled in. I will call to order the regular meeting of our Zoning and Planning Committee. Today is November 9th, 2017. I'm Lisa Bender. I chair the committee. We have a quorum present with Council Members Goodman, Andrew Johnson, and Council President Johnson. Today's agenda is a bit packed with 11 items. We start with the consent items and then we will return back to the public hearings. That gives us item number 5, which is approving a rezoning at 714 30th Avenue North. And that's to allow for an addition to a place of assembly, a church there. Item number 6 is approving an application for a street vacation at 3500 Cedar Lake Avenue. Item number 7 is the local historic landmark designation of the Messiah Evangelical Lutheran Church. I've been asked by Councilmember Warsami's office to move to postpone this item. He was not able to make it today, and this is in his ward. Item number 8 is passage of an ordinance amending our zoning code related to exterior building materials. Item number 9 is regulation passing an ordinance related to parking garages. Item number 10 is passing an ordinance that updates our land use fees and related standards. And item number 11 is referring to staff the subject matter of an ordinance amending our code for limited entertainment. So I will go ahead and see if anyone wants to pull any of those items off for discussion. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to pull 8 just for a little more discussion. And
sure. Presentation.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Anything else?
And Madam Chair, so 7 is postponed.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So I will then we'll pull item 8. I will move approval for items 5, 6, 9, 10, and 11, and move to postpone item 7 for one cycle. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Those items carry. And so that means we'll discuss item 8 at the end of the meeting. So item number 1 is a certificate of appropriateness appeal for a building at 424 Washington Avenue North. We'll start with the staff presentation and then move to the public hearing. How many people would like to speak on this item, if I may? Thank you. Okay.
Good morning, Chair Bender, council members. Item number 1 is an appeal of the decision of the Heritage Preservation Commission, who approved a certificate of appropriateness to allow for an addition, including a parking garage that would access the basement level of the existing building at 424 Washington Avenue North. On September 26th, the Heritage Preservation Commission took action to approve the staff recommendation with the stated findings and the stated conditions of approval you found in your packets today to approve the project as requested. On October 6th, Lee Dean, on behalf of Security Warehouse and Fifth Avenue Lofts Association, filed an appeal of the decision of the Preservation Commission approving the certificate of appropriateness. So the project included an underground parking garage, landscaping, and retaining walls. So I'll just kind of highlight the property and the project details, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. So the property is located in the Warehouse Historic District. You can see it highlighted here on the map. There's a shared drive and access amongst the properties. So here are your Security and Fifth Avenue lofts. The subject property is here at 424 Washington Avenue North. The access to the existing surface parking is off of Washington Avenue North, and this is a shared access easement amongst the property owners of the 3 properties. The proposal would be to adjust the surface parking lot and then provide a ramp down near the center of the building. Additionally, there would be some landscaping here. Because of this ramping down, they have to create retaining walls in order to traverse the property into the building that accesses the lower level. From the side elevation, this is what it would approximately look like with the overhead door that would roll up. Here you can see the walls as well. Oops. Here is the existing condition, including the 2 windows that would be removed from this facade. Staff was not able to identify any historic photos of this facade of the building, so we're unable to determine whether or not these are original windows, but staff felt as though this is not a primary facade, and therefore the loss of these windows to provide the garage door would not make the property incompatible with the historic district. There's also a proposal to add a landscaped yard here, including some shrubs and a tree here to provide some screening and a visual barrier between the public sidewalk and the existing surface parking. Here's a cross section that shows the ramping down that would have to occur. A portion of that first floor would have to be removed in order to allow for a vehicle to access the basement. It's about, if I remember correctly, about 180 square feet of that first floor. Here, that is better. So this is the first floor and kind of the area identified where that would be removed. Here's another photograph of the existing condition, and then as proposed, this is the rendering. So as I mentioned, there would be landscaping here. Staff has asked that it be more of a hedge-like shrubbery to allow for some visual screening, and then it would be one canopy tree. So from the public realm, you'll basically see these walls that are retaining in order to also allow for the separation. The door would not be as visible because the door is quite a bit lower on the building as it's accessing the basement. With that, I can take any questions.
Are there any questions for staff? There are none, and we've been joined by Councilmember Reich.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. And for this, just come on up and state your name and address for the record. We try to keep the testimony to 2 or 3 minutes per person. Welcome.
Good morning. I'm Lee Dean. I'm president of the board of directors for the Homeowners Association for the 2 loft buildings that are impacted by the by this proposal. We're located directly across from the parking lot from the Kildall building. Anyone using the ramp would have to go through our parking lot to get to it. Now, pedestrians and those in vehicles or on bicycles have only a fleeting glance as they pass the historic Kildall building. But that building has a more enduring presence for the 300 plus residents who live there and who look over this area or walk through it on a daily basis. The association believes that the proposed ramp will change the appearance of that building in a way that affects the environment around it and narrows the drive-through space in a way that is going to affect our residents. That drive-through space, according to the city planning department, has been there as long as their records show. The proposal also notes also would be adding what is really the equivalent of a loading zone in the form of a ramp in an area of a historic building where there was none prior. Our association is committed to the preservation of historic buildings. In fact, Security Warehouse, which was built in 1902, is in the midst of more than a $500,000 tuck pointing project. Many of our residents have lived in these buildings since they were repurposed or built 12 years ago. Many have moved there specifically because of the historic nature of the neighborhood. To propose a change in a historic building to accommodate 20 to 24 people and their cars while adversely affecting 300 plus residents seems like an unreasonable trade-off and an incredible stretch to say that the parking is being added in a, quote, thoughtful and concealed way. There are also issues of the landscaping that are being proposed that would hide this ramp. Of course, it's only going to hide it from the people who are on Washington Avenue. It's not going to detract, it's not going to help the situation for the 300 residents. More importantly, the plan, the way it is proposed right now, has landscaping and a tree in an area where no irrigation is being recommended, where the plan does not include any irrigation. And there is also a plastic pipe that goes down Washington Avenue along the sidewalk there that we at our association stumbled onto that has prevented in the past a tree from going in front of the Kildall building. So we don't think it's going to help, in other words. We don't believe that the attempts to hide the ramp or to provide, in the words of the heritage guidelines, natural elements that promote livability will be sufficient to meet its stated purpose. In fact, we don't think that this project promotes livability at all, whether it's for aesthetic or for practical reasons. We also have one more concern, which is a little bit unusual for a historic project, and this one concerns safety. When the proposal in effect narrowing a drive-through area, and it's also increasing traffic. And this would make our parking lot more hazardous. We have 30 plus children who live in our two buildings. And just this past summer alone, we had serious construction going on between the Kildall buildings changes and then also our own with our tuck pointing project. We already had one car accident there. And we want to make sure that no one is hurt, that there's no more accidents. So for all these reasons, we ask you to support our effort to maintain the look of the neighborhood as well as the safety of it by voting against the proposal for a parking ramp. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. So the next speaker, come on up.
Hello, my name is Sarah Commerce. I own Commerce Custom Jewelers, which is located in the Kindle building at 217 Fifth Avenue North. I'm in favor of this parking structure because I've already been a tenant and a resident in the neighborhood for 4 years, and parking is going to be continually a problem, as it has been with all the new development, more residents, more businesses moving to the neighborhood. We already access that driveway to park along the back side of it. I have one parking spot there. We're going to continue to access it. This way it allows us to park underground, alleviating some of the pressure and the tension of all the people that are driving through that parking area. I think it would just add value to the building and add value to where people need to park, and it wouldn't be extra disruptive to people since we're already accessing it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I'll just note for my colleagues and folks here that we do also have all of the testimony and discussion from the Heritage Preservation Commission in front of us. So next speaker, please come on up. Would anyone else like to speak? Is the applicant here, like the owner of the building? Would you like to address some of the, the impetus for this project or how your position?
Thank you. My name is Justin Weinberg. I'm with the law firm of Briggs & Morgan, here representing the owner. With me is Paul DeZubnar, who actually is one of the principals of the owner as well. I think the record is pretty clear here. Nothing's changed since the Heritage Preservation Commission and when they made their decision. Concerning safety, and I heard that piece addressed. One, I don't think it's appropriate when we're talking about a certificate of appropriateness on whether or not it meets the historical guidelines. Staff has found, and it's a very clear record, that this project checks all the boxes for a certificate of appropriateness. But with respect to that, and I want to make sure that we're clear, is that we're talking about 22 stalls underneath for the tenants of this building. It's removing 3 stalls from the outside. So we're talking about a difference of 19 parking stalls. That's it for an increase. So it's not a very significant increase when you consider the number of residents that live at the appellant's property. And we're talking about tenants only in this building, and they're office tenants. So it's 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. That's it. There's one retail component outside of the jewelry, and it's fronting Washington Avenue. So we're not talking about a drastic increase here. We do have shared parking. It's a matter of public easement. There's an easement agreement. So that isn't really a concern either in this particular instance. But we think we meet all of the requirements for certificate of appropriateness. Staff has recommended it. And with that, we really don't have much more to add unless there's questions.
Are there any questions? Councilmember Goodman.
I'm just wondering, just because you don't have to do anything to help mitigate it doesn't mean you can't do something to help mitigate the neighbors' concerns. What can you do to help alleviate their concerns?
Well, on the concerns in terms of the what it's going to look like, I think we have mitigated that. We're doing it with some retaining walls. We're putting the door as far down as possible to try and mitigate whatever aesthetic concerns that they may have. Regarding safety, again, I think the fact that we're removing 3 stalls, we're not adding that many new stalls, is a mitigating factor. I mean, if they could add more stalls, I don't know, what they would do to add more stalls, but we're not adding that many stalls. So I think that's a mitigation as well.
I'm thinking like, additional greening or some sort of marking so people know that more cars are going to be passing through here, or some sort of pavement differentials. I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is, yeah, they got concerns. I don't care because we're not really doing that much. And I don't actually, I think it's good that you're adding more parking. I don't have any objection
Sure.
to that. I'm just wondering why there's this kind of cavalier point of view about it with regard to the neighbors' concerns. Can't you do something? Can you add more greening? Can you make the pavement different? Can you pave the entrance to it? There are 400 some odd residents that live adjacent to this that it might be a new condition they're unaware of. And
Sure.
people come here. I mean, there's a successful restaurant in this building now.
And some of the signage and the pavement concerns, I think, we could certainly talk to them about that. But again, this is shared parking. So the property that we're talking about in terms of where you would actually have to change the pavement, it's actually their property. It's not necessarily our property. We have an easement agreement for it.
Have you met with them to talk
So
about some of their concerns?
We have been talking with them. In fact, I talked to their council 2 days ago. So we are trying to get together with them to discuss this project.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay. Would
Thank
anyone
you.
else like to speak on this item? Anyone else? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Councilmember Goodman. Sorry. Okay. Is there a motion? I'm not moving it either. Council President.
Staff recommendation.
Okay. There's a motion to deny the appeal, which would approve the Heritage Preservation Commission certificate of appropriateness. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair.
Council President.
Could I add a caveat then that the developer meet with the residents to address some of the issues that were brought up with concerns about safety, and then also the landscaping issue, I think that you talked about. So landscaping and safety.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate your comments, Council President Johnson. I think the only way they're going to do that is if we don't approve it. So at a minimum, I suppose we should suggest forwarding this without recommendation towards the council meeting next week and see what they come up with. Would you consider that a friendly substitute?
Sure.
I know it's never this is as friendly as it gets, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
move. I'm going to move this forward without recommendation and ask that the developer and the neighbors sit down and come up with something that can be a little bit better for both, attempting to create some sort of win-win if possible. And if it happens, we'll move on it on Friday. And if not, maybe we'll postpone it on the floor a cycle or two and see how long it takes to come up with something that's a little bit more acceptable. I do want to note to the residents, they have the right to put a parking lot here. We want them to do that. We're good with that. So, well, maybe we're not all good with that. I shouldn't say that. I don't know, but I think we are. We want the tenants to have more parking. We want the building, this historic building, to be successful. So we need you to come to a win-win on your own if that's possible.
I'll note, I'm not sure we've ever had neighbors opposing parking before, but we understand. Okay, so we have a motion to forward the item without recommendation, and that means that we would make the final decision at the council meeting a week from tomorrow. I just echo that, what my colleagues have said. I think when we're looking at buildings like this, we want to both preserve the historic quality of the building and make it as amenable to the neighbors as possible, but also support the flexible use of our historic buildings, because over time, that's what helps us maintain and restore them and not lead to like it eventually being torn down with something new coming in, right? So that's the balance I think we're trying to strike. I did note too that the discussion at Heritage Preservation Commission was also a lot around the landscaping and mitigation, and there still wasn't a conclusion there. So I think this is a good way to get that finalized before next Friday. Any more discussion? Seeing none, all approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. That completes item 1. We'll move along. We have quite a lot on the agenda. Item number 2 is a certificate of appropriateness appeal at 200 University Avenue Southeast. And so just to get a sense, how many people are here for this item? Okay. All right. Thank you. Sorry, I just had to make a little joke that we
Good morning, committee members. Peter Crandall, Senior City Planner with CPED Land Use. Before you today is an appeal of the decision of the Heritage Preservation Commission on October 10th regarding several properties at University Avenue Southeast. The original application was for a 26-story residential building. This is a full block development within the St. Anthony Falls Historic District, as shown on the Historic District map here. For reference, the underlying zoning on the site is I-1 with the Industrial Living Overlay District. This is a map showing the St. Anthony Falls Historic District and its sub-character areas. The St. Anthony Falls Historic District has a period of significance of 1858 to 1941. The property in question is significant under criterion 1, which is that the property is associated with significant events or with periods that exemplify broad patterns of cultural, political, economic, or social history. And this has to do with the Falls of St. Anthony obviously being a center of development and cultural heritage in the founding and development of Minneapolis. The project in question falls within the University Avenue transition area. That's a character sub-area of the larger district. The St. Anthony Falls Historic District Design Guidelines give some context and direction for this particular character area and mention that it transitions from an industrial and commercial development along Main Street to what was formerly an eclectic mix of commercial buildings, single and two family dwellings, and factories, although much of that historic infrastructure has been lost to this day. The area has also experienced some significant change in development over recent years, as many are aware. The subject site in question is today used primarily as a surface parking lot. It contains no historic structures or historically significant infrastructure. The original proposal brought forward by the applicant was for a somewhat shorter building than is before you today, a 20-story tower that was quite a bit wider along the University Avenue frontage. Staff raised some concerns, and the item was brought to the Heritage Preservation Commission for an informational item in July. Some significant feedback was provided based on historic district design guidelines to the applicant, and the applicant agreed to make significant revisions to the project. There's a summary of those changes that were made prior to the HPC public hearing. This is also included in the staff report, but the largest change was that the tower was made significantly narrower, so it has a smaller floor plate along the University Avenue Southeast frontage. As a result of that, it got somewhat taller, going from 22 to 26 stories. There were some changes in materials to simplify the material palette, and additionally some changes in the number of townhome units lining the other block frontages. So this is a graphic showing the difference between that original proposal and the proposal that was brought to the public hearing in front of the HPC. The site plan shows that the site is, the interior of the site is occupied by an enclosed parking garage that will serve primarily the residents of the building, and then that parking garage is lined with townhomes that open onto the street frontages on the 2nd Avenue Southeast, 2nd Street, and 3rd Avenue Southeast building frontages. And then the primary entrance for the tower portion of the project is located at University Avenue Southeast. This is highlighting where the taller portions of the structure are located. So this is the 26-story portion of the project. and then a 5 to 6 story apartment structure. The 26-story portion of the project is set back continuously from University Avenue Southeast by 18 feet from the public right-of-way. And the 2nd Avenue Southeast elevation is set back, I believe, 6 to 20 feet, depending. And then a rendering of the tower looking from the University Avenue elevation. This is the elevation of the principal entrance to the tower. Some additional renderings of the structure. And then getting into the Historic District Design Guidelines, the Heritage Preservation Commission denied the Certificate of Appropriateness based on several findings. One was that it does not meet Design Guideline 9.9, that the overall height of the buildings shall be compatible with the character area, that it does not meet Design Guideline Requirement 9.10, that taller portions of a structure should be positioned away from neighboring buildings of lower scale, that it does not meet Design Guideline 10.8 in the University Avenue transition area, the maximum height should not exceed 8 stories, and that does not meet the intent of the character area that the grain elevators should also continue their visual prominence over the rest of the district. I wanted to highlight a few of the design guideline directives and caveats that are contained within the St. Anthony Falls Historic District. While the overall height of buildings are directed to be compatible with the character area, the design guidelines do allow that a building height that exceeds the height range established in the context will be considered where it is demonstrated that the additional height will be compatible with adjacent properties within the character area. Taller portions are set back. Access to light and air for surrounding properties is respected. Key views are maintained. So that goes to the work that staff did with the applicant early on in the process to narrow the tower portion of the project to maintain views through the site from the neighborhood to the river and not to obscure views of the historic infrastructure from different parts of the neighborhood. And also to address that access to light and air of surrounding properties issue. In terms of the University Avenue transition area, there's a similar caveat that buildings, though there is an 8-story height limit spelled out, portions of the buildings that would be taller than those seen historically should be set back from the street edge, and in areas where there's a strong industrial context, a variety of heights may be appropriate. So it does have some similar language in terms of this being one of the areas where there is not a significant amount of historic infrastructure. There was a long discussion at HPC about where the most appropriate location for the taller portion of the project would be, and some general consensus that the taller portion is probably in the right area in terms of it not encroaching on the historic infrastructure as much as possible. So that is where staff came to their conclusion to recommend approval. Additionally, I should point out that we had some conditions of approval on the project, that they meet certain other design guidelines within the historic district, particularly dealing with building frontage, active building frontage at the corner of University and 3rd in particular, where there was a significant mechanical space. Additionally, we requested that the applicant work to continue to simplify the material palette and unify the design such that the building reflects the historic character of the district more accurately and blends with the historic infrastructure more seamlessly. And that had to do primarily with window design and material palette. I know that the applicant has a presentation for you today and may highlight some additional changes that they're proposing to the project, but I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I'll relinquish this.
I have a question for staff.
Yes.
So just to, where we're at in this process is on the certificate of appropriateness decision. Can you talk about the land use applications that would be required for this building if it was found to be appropriate for the historic district? So what is the zoning here? If you mentioned that, I missed it, and I'm sorry.
Sure. So the applicant has actually filed a formal land use application that will only be considered if the certificate of appropriateness is granted. The underlying zoning is I-1, and it has the industrial living overlay district. The applicant will be seeking a planned unit development for this project, which then allows for certain exceptions to zoning rules regarding height and bulk, but asks for specific concessions in terms of site amenities and enhancements that need to add up to a certain number of points, essentially, as a part of that land use application. And that would, as I said, only happen with the certificate of appropriateness being granted for the project.
Okay, that's helpful. And I mean, I can imagine that we don't really have any zoning classifications that would kind of lead to this type of building, except in the downtown zoning. I think, is that right? Like, you couldn't build that building with C3A zoning, or
not without significant variances.
I think that's helpful context.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions for staff? Council President.
Just, Madam Chair, Mr. Crandall, perhaps you don't know, but this is across the street from a big parking ramp. Is that park, I will say I parked in this lot when my colleague, Councilmember Fry, got married, so I'm thinking about this. Is that a public ramp? I'm just trying to remember.
I don't believe it's publicly owned, but it is publicly accessible.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's open to the public?
Yeah, Madam Chair, we sold that ramp
Right.
with the purpose of having development surrounding it on all sides.
Okay,
And that was,
okay.
we sold it in order to facilitate development and hopefully allow for parking to be used in it for development. And as we saw that years ago, 10 years or more, as an area to be redeveloped.
Councilmember Goodman, Madam Chair, may I ask Councilmember Goodman a question? So Councilmember Goodman, was that a part of the sale of the number of parking ramps that we did at one time?
Madam Chair, Council President Johnson, it was, and at the time we sold it to Cunningham, and they were supposed to build something where Lattice is now building. But we did have a long conversation about the future of these properties, even years ago, about this area being redeveloped and it being a redevelopment site.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, that means we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. So this is the appeal of the HPC's decision. So I think perhaps we should start with the applicant, so we can get that context first and then go from there with the public hearing.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning, Council and Chair. My name is Rebecca Green. I'm a senior associate at Doran Companies, the applicant. I'm here with my colleagues, Tony Keekley, who is Senior Vice President of Development, and John Ferrier, Vice President of Architecture at CSM. I will briefly cover the regulatory framework governing this site, as well as the evolution of the project. Tony will cover the basis for the HPC denial, and John is available to answer any questions as it relates to the design. In 2009, the comprehensive plan targeted activity centers, including the East Hennepin Activity Center, where this site is located, for very high density development, which according to the comp plan is outlined as 120 to 200 units per acre. Our proposed development is well below this targeted density at 147 units per acre. In 2016, the city reaffirmed its commitment to promoting density in the East Hennepin activity area by quadrupling its targeted density to allow up to 800 units per acre. We're not close to 800 units per acre. We have worked extensively with city staff, as Peter outlined very well, to design a project that both fulfills the city's goals for growth, as well as seeks to honor the St. Anthony Falls Historic District guidelines. Our initial design was a 6-story donut. It was a building that had 114 units per acre. Yet given its location within the activity center, we were encouraged by city staff to think bigger and add density. A revised plan showed a tower and a 6-story apartment building in one mass, and Peter did show an illustration of this. However, after receiving feedback from the city and the neighborhood, we made a skinnier tower created distinct massing between the buildings, and added retail to a prominent corner. These are few of the changes, though they're quite notable on the screen, that we've made. And the city has noted several other important changes that are outlined in the report.
As Peter said, the staff recommended approval of our application with conditions. We've already incorporated those conditions and submitted that into for planning consideration. Mr. Crandall did a great job on the staff report in addressing how we meet all the guidelines of the St. Anthony Falls Historic District. I'm just going to highlight, we worked extensively with city staff coming up with a project that they could support, that they felt met those guidelines. The HPC Commission differed with them on really 4 points, all related to the height of the tower. Peter mentioned this as well, 9.9, 9.10, 10.8, and the design intent. I want to just address these 4 reasons for denial. The guidelines actually allow for increasing the height when meeting certain conditions. We felt we met these conditions, and more importantly, city staff has felt we've met these conditions. So there's 4 conditions up on the screen that you can see. To get an increase in height by meeting these conditions, the city has the discretion to increase that height. We divided the mass into 2 distinct sections, a 6-story project and the 25-story tower, or 26-story tower. This created large openings on 2nd and 3rd that really break up the massing and provide this variation in height. As you're going from taller as it relates to the far northern district guidelines, or far northern portion of the district, down to the more historic area of the district. By creating this skinnier tower, we respect the light and air surrounding the projects. Now, in the context of the guidelines, we actually don't have any surrounding projects because we're bounded by streets on all 4 sides. So the guidelines were actually written to build adjacent to existing structures, which we have none. Like I said, we placed the tower on the far northern end of the district, preserving any key views down to the river. And we've set back the taller portions from the street. We're actually 38 feet back from University Avenue, which includes the setback with the 8-foot, we're having 8-foot sidewalks and 8-foot boulevards here. So we're actually 38 feet back from University Avenue. Guideline 910 states that position taller portions of the structure away from the neighboring buildings of a lower scale. Once again, there are no buildings of a lower scale within the district as it relates to this project. Now, there are some smaller scale buildings on the north side of University Avenue, but they're outside of the district. We wanted to put the tower up on University to really anchor it to where the major transit and commercial corridors are. It also sets this building as far away as possible from any of the historic structures which are across 2nd Street within the districts. The setbacks for this project are actually greater than the setbacks of taller and comparable towers approved within the existing East Hennepin Activity Center. 10.8, the guideline that the University Avenue transition area will have a maximum height of not to exceed 8 stories. The CPED report already addressed this and said the proposed project will not materially impair the significance or the integrity of the property or the surrounding properties. And we're guessing that the city must have a desire to create heightened density within this area. The Lattice Tower, which is adjacent 1 block over from this project, was approved and is actually within the same sub area of this historic district. The design intent that the grain elevators should continue their visual prominence over the rest of the district. The guidelines state that this district has actually experienced significant changes, and most of its historic fabric has already been lost. Furthermore, to the extent the narrative seeks to confirm the height of the new development in that sub-area, it's clear that this goal is purely submissive or permissive. The guidelines make it clear when the term should is used The guidelines give way to when the city determines that they are not applicable. The new buildings should reflect the massing of the other historic buildings within the sub-area and not that of the grain elevators. And the grain elevators should also continue their visual prominence for the rest of the district. The prominent views of our proposed building will actually be from the downtown side and across the river. So some perspective views here of our project. And this is from Gold Medal Park. And you can see our structure right here, right behind the Phoenix. So it fits within the context of the neighborhood and the district. Here's one from the Stone Arch Bridge. This one's actually a little bit tougher to see, but you can just see the top portion of our proposed structure above the Phoenix. Also with the A mill and the red tile elevators in the foreground, they really maintain their prominence of the district. So the staff considered this requirement and concluded that the proposed project would not materially impair the significance or the integrity of the property or the surrounding properties. A couple other key findings from the report: the project would not negatively impact the design integrity of the district. The master plan does not contain specific guidance for height, but indicates that higher density residential development is appropriate at this location because it's along a transit and transportation corridor and near a commercial center. At 147 dwelling units an acre, it's consistent with the city's comprehensive plan, and it's also consistent with the Mercy Homes neighborhood plan. And even though the proposed building would be taller than other buildings on the east bank of the river, the massing and the scale would not be out of character with the East Hennepin Activity Center in which it's located. There are a lot of conflicting goals within the regulatory framework of this site. Our approach was to work with staff and come up with a design that they could both support and met these guidelines, in which they did. The guidelines make clear that when a specific guideline is phrased in the terms what should happen, those guidelines give way when the city determines that they're not applicable. In this case, the city has clearly stated its intention that growth in the East Hennepin Activity Center is expressed through the comprehensive plan and should control over the more conservative guidelines of the St. Anthony Falls Historic District. Thank you, and I'm here to answer any questions. One thing I actually would like to address, we want to acknowledge the letter we received last night from the National Park Service. I don't think we need to go in detail. There's nothing new or novel, and it doesn't raise any other newer or particular points. However, I would like to object to the fact that the National Park Service unfairly suggests that the city staff report was lacking in its analysis. We worked probably close to 6 months with city staff on morphing a project that we knew that could fit these guidelines.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant? All right, we don't have any. So we can go ahead and open for additional public testimony. Anyone who wants to speak can come up and state your name and address for the record. I'll try to keep people to 2 or 3 minutes.
I'm just hoping I get 1 more minute. I'm speaking on behalf of the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association. Good morning, Chair Bender and council members. My name is Chris Lautenschlager. I'm the executive director of the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association at 500 8th Avenue Southeast. Our organization supports replacing a surface parking lot with a high-density development in the St. Anthony Falls Historic District. We feel that development on this site is an opportunity to improve the residential character of University Avenue and 2nd Street and improve pedestrian connections to the riverfront along 2nd and 3rd Avenues. Our comments today are guided by the Minneapolis Comprehensive Plan, our City Council approved master plan from 2014, and most importantly, the St. Anthony Falls Historic District guidelines, to which I will refer frequently. A month ago at the meeting before the HPC, Marcy Homes presented some suggestions to improve this project. We are pleased to see 2 of them incorporated into the design before you today. One improvement is the relocation of the mechanicals from the corner of 3rd and University Avenues. They have been replaced by 2 retail spaces that will bring mixed use and more street level activity to that corner. The second improvement was the reduction of curb cuts along 3rd Avenue. This will improve the pedestrian experience as one walks from Holmes Park to the riverfront. Allow me to briefly highlight 4 other suggestions we have to improve this project. Suggestion 1, limit the height of the tower to the height of the nearby red tile elevator. The design guidelines suggest a limit of 8 stories for this block, but in order to achieve the appropriate high density for this site without creating solid blocks of apartments, The adjacent standard of no taller than the red tile elevator should apply to allow for some variety in massing. The guidelines do allow for additional height when design is compatible with the context. A slim tower, or even two towers, one noticeably lower than the first, both set back from University Avenue, could be acceptable. Suggestion 2. Set the front wall 5 feet back from the University Avenue property line. The guidelines do call for a continuous street wall with building fronts at the street edge, allowing for some variation. However, University Avenue is a much wider roadway than other nearby streets, and we would prefer that the continuous street wall will be set back 5 feet to allow for more green space for this residential but very busy street. This will set the pattern for all 3 blocks from 2nd to 5th Avenues. Suggestion 3, set back the tower 30 feet from the front wall on University Avenue. According to the guidelines, buildings exceeding the height limit will be considered when taller portions are set back significantly from the street. When discussing the University Avenue transition area, the guidelines specifically recommend that taller portions of buildings should be set back from the street edge, and a variety of heights may be appropriate. A setback of 30 feet will ease the transition from the much lower residential buildings to the north and reduce how much the tower looms over University Avenue. And our last suggestion, work with CPED staff to create fewer but more pronounced horizontal and vertical articulations on the 2nd Street and 3rd Avenue facades of the 6-story apartment block. The guidelines state a new facade should reflect the established range of building widths. A block-long facade is not appropriate. This project's high, low, and mid-rise buildings on University and 2nd Avenues create interesting and varied massing, but variation in heights and widths is also needed on 3rd Avenue and 2nd Street. The guidelines recommend variation in building height in a large development, which this is, and that a large development be divided into modules in order to reduce the perceived mass of a larger building. Marcy Homes recommends that the architects continue to work with your staff on a design with fewer but more pronounced articulations and create a roofline solution that meets the design guidelines. To conclude, since the original unveiling of these plans, there have been several improvements. Still, we urge the Council to add conditions requiring the design to more closely follow the design guidelines as this surface parking lot is transformed into a more appropriate use. The current proposal involves only 1 block of the 3-block site that General Mills has sold. What is built on this block will become a precedent for the other 2. This is especially true along University Avenue. Marcy Homes is on record supporting more dense residential growth on this block, but the historic character of the area, as detailed in the design guidelines, and the needs of the neighborhood, as expressed in our council-approved master plan, must be taken into account when evaluating this development. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And I think these are very helpful suggestions. I'm sorry if you emailed us. I haven't seen. Did you?
I have more that I can give to the clerk.
Okay. I think it would be very helpful if we could get copies of those detailed suggestions to the committee members as we listen to the rest of the testimony. Okay, next speaker. Anyone else like to speak?
Good morning, council members. My name is Susan Higgins, and I live at 222 2nd Street Southeast in the Phoenix. My husband and I own 2 units there. We live in one, and our son lives in the other, and both of our units face 2nd Street Southeast. I support the Heritage Preservation Commission's unanimous decision that the building does not fit the character of the neighborhood. We love the neighborhood and have appreciated the way it has developed in the 6 years we've been here. As I walked my dog along Main Street and 2nd Street Southeast yesterday, I took note of the varied blocks along Main Street and 2nd Street. I love the mix of the old and the new and the variety of size and shapes of the buildings with green spaces and trees in between. There are buildings that run a whole block and there are buildings that are tall, but no building takes up a whole block and is tall. The mass of the building will be overwhelming compared to the smaller scale of the buildings in the area. This design is not appropriate for the St. Anthony Falls Historic District, and I urge you to uphold the unanimous decision of the Heritage Preservation Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good morning. My name is Jonathan Moore. I work for the National Park Service here at the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area. And we did submit a letter with our comments in advance of this meeting. And were you all able to get a copy of that letter? Okay. I also have copies here if not. The letter is our most complete version of our comments, but I was hoping to just highlight a few of them here this morning. The project in question is located within a unit of the National Park System. Congress created this national park in large part because of the nationally significant resources that are present here, including the St. Anthony Falls Historic District, which is listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and the Pillsbury A Mill and the Washburn A Mill, which have both been designated National Historic Landmarks. When it comes to protecting historic properties within the corridor, cities play a key role. Cities that have chosen to become certified local governments, as the city of Minneapolis has, are particularly important because you pledged an extra commitment to historic preservation by agreeing to adopt and enforce local heritage preservation ordinances. And one example, of course, of how you carry out that commitment is through your enforcement of the St. Anthony Falls Historic District Guidelines. And I think we can all agree that the guidelines were adopted not with the intent to serve as suggestions to be incorporated when it's convenient to do so, but rather as clearly defined parameters developed prior to any specific project to ensure designs are compatible with the historic district and to ensure that the significance and integrity for which they were designated, remain true. While a good portion of the guidelines do relate to this project, it seems that there are a few requirements in particular that are most relevant to today's discussion. And they have been discussed, but I think some of them weren't necessarily, details were left out of at least one of them, so I didn't plan to read them, but I will. 9.9, the overall height of a new building shall be compatible with the character area. If it exceeds the height range, it's demonstrated that the additional height will be compatible with adjacent properties, within the character area as a whole, and for the historic district at large. And I'll just repeat that last part, that it would need to be compatible with the historic district at large. 10.8 states that in the University Avenue transition area, the maximum building height should not exceed 8 stories. Mid-rise, low-rise, and very low-rise building heights are most appropriate. And the character area intent states that the grain elevators should continue their visual prominence over the rest of the district. And a few statements that were just made this morning about that there are no adjacent properties because the whole block is being developed. I think it might be reasonable to assume if you're developing the whole block, you'll want to take in adjacent blocks, properties across the street, and the character area and the district as a whole into consideration. The statement was also made that there are no other buildings of a lower scale within the district. And with all due respect, nearly every building in the district, historic or non-historic, contributing or not contributing, is actually of a lower scale than the proposed project. So based on those requirements alone, the project appears to be inconsistent with the guidelines. And in that respect, the HPC rendered the only decision that they, in good conscience, could, which was denying the application for the certificate of appropriateness. The staff report generally provided good analysis of the project as someone standing on the sidewalk experiencing the building up close. I think it was quite sufficient there in terms of addressing materials, windows, plantings, and setbacks. It was inadequate, however, in its ability to jump scales and to consider the project's implications on the character area or the historic district as a whole, especially as it relates to building height. We believe the introduction of such a dramatic building height would diminish the integrity of the historic district and especially the Pillsbury A Mill and NHL. And for decades, the A Mill was known as the largest flour mill in the world. And so allowing buildings in close proximity to loom over it and to dwarf its size would likely diminish its integrity. And I'm wrapping up. And so in light of what's at stake, we would encourage the Planning and Zoning Committee to deny the appeal and affirm the HPC's decision, or at the very least not act on this until it can be more adequately informed by specific building heights of existing structures within the character area and the historic district as a whole, especially as it relates to the NHL. And if If the committee would anticipate the need to exceed the allowable building height of 8 stories, more time would allow for more rigorous analysis of what would be an appropriate height. And the National Park Service would be happy to contribute to such analysis if the city would find it helpful. So with that, we look forward to continuing to work with you as a certified local government to protect nationally significant historic resources within the city. And we thank you for this opportunity to comment.
Thank you so much. And if you do have copies of the letter with you, I think, yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you, sir. Anyone else like to speak? Good morning.
Chair Bender, members of the committee, my name is Edna Brzaias. I live at 4 Grove Street in Minneapolis. And while I'm not speaking for them, many of you know that I'm on the board of Preserve Minneapolis and serve on the St. Anthony Falls Heritage Board. I also own a historic property in the historic district in the Neenah neighborhood. I worked on these guidelines and I'm very familiar with the issues. I'm going to talk a little bit about our neighboring organization, the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association. Perhaps because of their proximity to the university, they're just known as above average. And so when you see a document from them or analysis, as you've seen today, you'll know that it's very sophisticated and forward thinking. Long ago, it saw the development potential and opportunity at the General Mills site to bring density to the neighborhood. It approached this opportunity just the same as it did with the A-Mill property and developed a one-page description of the goals they sought with the development, way ahead of any project being proposed. Marcy Homes is proud of being one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city and is used to working with developers on complicated, sophisticated projects on the historic district and coming up with good solutions. It previously worked with Schaefer Richardson and then Mr. Duran on the A-Mill site. Mr. Duran has modified his project to meet some of the salient concerns of the city and the neighborhood. However, more work needs to be done. I urge you to uphold the HPC decision denying the certificate of appropriateness. This will allow Mr. Duran to continue his work with the neighborhood, the city, on issues that would help the project better meet the guidelines for St. Anthony Falls Historic District. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Come on up, please.
Hi, my name is Eric Wunderlich. Good morning. I live at 413 5th Street Southeast. I wonder if this is part of the record. This is the piece that the developer sent out inviting people to what he called the neighborhood meeting, or?
We'd be happy to have it
Okay.
with the clerk.
So this morning I'm speaking on, I'm a member of the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association Land Use and Development Committee, Marcy Homes Neighborhood Board Member elect. But today I'm speaking on behalf of Neighbors for East Bank Livability and the hundreds of individuals that are supporting our efforts to preserve the integrity of the St. Anthony Falls Historic District. And ask that you today uphold HPC's denial of a certificate of appropriateness for this project. We understand that there will be development on the General Mills site and look forward to a proposal from Doran that meets the historic district guidelines. But this project as proposed is clearly not in compliance. We talked about compatibility with adjacent buildings, the building height, yet the General Mills A-Mill site is 3 times closer to the proposed project than the tall buildings referenced as being in the area. I would think that the ongoing opposition to the Alatis project, the going on 2-year legal challenge, and the opposition that is coming forward to this project would be an indication to the value that the community puts on preserving the St. Anthony Falls Historic District. The city is tasked with stewardship of the historic district and is accountable for maintaining its integrity through enforcement of the agreements spelled out in the St. Anthony Falls Historic Guidelines. Given the significance of the district as it relates not only to Minneapolis history, but also statewide and national importance, this is a commitment to not be taken lightly. And furthermore, speaking on behalf of beleaguered working class residents of the city, as CPED has gone to cherry-pick the comp plan for to encourage the density on the site, I would also call out the commitment in the comp plan to providing affordable housing in the city. I ask that you honor this commitment, addressing the issues of availability of affordable housing by requiring that CPED development review incorporate an analysis on any project's impact on housing, on adjacent housing affordability. Across the city and across the nation, we see impacts on gentrification on surrounding housing costs. Other cities are realizing that runaway development and corresponding gentrification is eroding housing affordability. So I ask that you just take a willful approach to addressing the affordable housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Would anyone else like to speak? Mr. Tucker, and does the development team have the proposal from the neighborhood organization? The clerk has it, and I would like to give you an opportunity to respond at that.
Good morning, Chair Bender and council members. Very nice to be able to address you. Couple of things. The handy dandy guideline from our various plans. I have just 4 copies, but I'd be happy to hand those out to members. I just wanted to mention that our first meeting seeing this proposal was back in May, and we had 100 neighbors there to look at the proposal and evaluate it. We asked for people's concerns. The biggest one was affordable housing, which I understand is not before you today, but certainly is an issue that the council will be dealing with a great deal. The other big concerns were about massing, too high, too wide, particularly the block-long 6-story buildings, which we see popping up all over the place, and people wanted that broken up. Some people actually didn't mind the height, but most thought it was excessive. So we did have this survey, but we didn't base our evaluation on that. We based it on established policy, and that's what's summarized in the sheets that I just handed out. Plenty of guidance there. And let me just summarize the guidance. It's been evaluated by Marcy Holmes, Executive Director, and by the Park Service, and it just comes down to this. The site needs a variety of heights, but not too high, a variety of widths, but not too wide. Towers can be accommodated, but they should be set back so as not to loom over their neighbors. And with that, I will sit down. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Nice to see you. Our long-serving planning commissioner. Would anyone else like to speak? And then why don't we have the development team then come up, and since you have the 4 proposed changes, it'd be helpful to hear your perspective on that in the project.
I do. I just want to start by saying I think you saw the card. We conducted our own neighborhood survey. We sent out just shy of 5,000 invites to everyone within the Marcy Holmes Neighborhood Association to attend a neighborhood meeting regarding the project. At that meeting, we had them fill out a survey. I gave a copy of that survey, and so you guys can all look at it. And I have just a quick summary of that survey. But I think it was included in your package. The vast majority of the survey respondents.
Excuse me, just a quick question from Councilmember Goodman.
The city recognizes the Marcy Holmes Neighborhood Association as the official organization that we rely on to deal with land use issues. Are you suggesting you've kind of created your own process outside of the Marcy Holmes process, and as a result, we should pay attention to your responses that you got from people?
We worked closely with the Land Use Association of the Marcy Holmes Neighborhood Association. I believe we've met 3 or 4 times.
Well, they're all shaking their heads, every one of them.
Did we meet 3 or 4 times?
After the first meeting, we wouldn't meet with us again.
Okay, so I just want to lay out there that we contract with 82 different neighborhood associations.
Yep.
And we take that seriously, and we take their feedback, and we make them responsible for reaching out to the neighborhoods, not the developer.
And just a slight distinction here. We met with the Land Use Committee a couple times. Then, because I believe our obligation is actually meet with the Marcy Holmes Neighborhood Association, who we've reached out to multiple times. And I think all that correspondence actually is in your package. About meeting together to discuss this project, and not necessarily just the Land Use Committee. But we wanted to garner feedback from the neighborhood, so that's why we elected to go out and have our own neighborhood meeting regarding the project, and not that just of the Land Use Committee. And I think Mr. Lautenschlager at the HPC meeting even said that the Land Use Committee is opposed to our project, but it's not necessarily everyone within the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association, which I actually have that right here as well.
Okay, so I think it would actually just, I appreciate the question. I think if you do have a specific response to these conditions, I mean, I'm just going to say I think the committee is going to be very likely to want to honor the fact that we have a neighborhood organization that is supportive of a pretty significant project here and willing to help continue to move the dialogue along to get to something that can be supported. That's a pretty significant change to the site. So maybe you want to take that.
The first one, I'm guessing, if I'm just going to go through these right here, limit the height of the red to the tower to the red tile elevator. Okay, thank you. Limit the height of the tower of the red tile elevator on a second tower on the block, noticeably lower than the first and properly set back from the street would be acceptable. We looked at adding 2 towers to the site. It was hard enough to get a consensus that 1 tower in 1 location would actually be, best for this site. By adding 2 towers, now we're introducing, another location. Where does that go? Does that actually go closer to the historic buildings? The other thing, as we add multiple towers, there's an economic impact, but there's also there's a livability impact where we have to create multiple lobbies, multiple access points, especially if we're asked to significantly push those into the building. We're also within the university overlay district, which requires a certain number of parking stalls, and we would not be able to meet those required parking stalls. Set back the front wall 5 feet back from the University Avenue Southeast property line. We, in our mind, address this by actually increasing kind of the human scale of our project by creating an 8-foot landscaped boulevard and an 8-foot sidewalk. And then along University Avenue, we added some commercial space to that as well. And then we positioned our bike lounge, bike lobby, and front entrance along there to activate that street frontage. Set back the tower 30 feet from the front wall of University Avenue. Once again, we've pushed our tower back into the project as far as we can to maintain that livability, to preserve the parking that we need to meet the University Avenue, University Overlay District. And we're actually, I believe, 38 feet from the back of the curb of University Avenue. Work with CPED staff to create fewer, more pronounced horizontal and vertical articulations on the 2nd Street and 3rd Avenue Southeast facades of the 6-story apartment block. This was not a concern of the Historic Preservation Commission. I believe this was one of the items that, one of the conditions of approval from city staff to help us simplify that facade, in which we've agreed to do and submitted in our Planning Commission submittal. So one of the other things that we've been using in this project to continually analyze it is what we call a Lumion model, which is basically a 3D model of the project.
Okay. I think.
Good morning. I'm John Ferrier with CSM Corporation. As Tony said, we're looking at the Lumion model. So this is at the street level along University, where we have a lot of our amenity space. We referenced the bike lounge. One thing we did do is we pulled the 6-story element away from the tower to reduce the massing of that and create some new views through the space. You see the tenant spaces there, the retail tenant spaces along University. As we go up the other side here, you see some more tenant space, and then we get into our townhomes. We created those townhomes along the streetscape to activate the street and to reduce it, to bring it down to more of a human scale and provide that layering and differential in ins and outs that we were asked to create. Right here you see the
access to the parking ramp. And as we wrap around, again, you're going to see the two-story townhomes right here. So we also have a variety. We have some one-story townhomes and some two-story townhomes to give some variation. We've simplified the color palette. We were asked to simplify the material and color palette to not make it so busy. So we're using one brick color, a main brick color with an accent brick. And then as we wrap around here, looking at more of those two-story townhomes. And as you can see, we've heavily landscaped the boulevard. As Tony said, we have an 8-foot sidewalk, 8-foot landscape boulevard to dress up the streetscape for. As you can see here, we're a look into our amenity courtyard, which will include a pool, grilling stations. It's the goal here is to provide a real community and a place for the residents to hang out, and it does create a real community. There's games, bocce ball, a lot of sitting areas.
I think we're all ready to wrap.
Oh, okay.
Are there any questions for the applicant before we close the public hearing? Okay. Would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to move to grant the appeal with the conditions that have been outlined by the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association. So grant it, condition that they limit the height of the tower to the height of the red tile elevator. A second tower, noticeably lower, would be acceptable. That they set the front wall 5-foot setback from the University Avenue Southeast property line, that they set back the tower 30 feet from the front wall on University Avenue, and work with CPED staff to create fewer but more pronounced horizontal and vertical articulations in the 2nd Street Southeast and 3rd Avenue Southeast facades of the 6-story apartment block.
Okay, so the motion is to do what Councilmember Goodman just said.
I can speak to
Add
that
these
if you'd like.
conditions of approval. Is there any discussion?
I can speak to that. I think density in this location is good. And we sold the city ramp knowing that that's going to be what would happen. So I don't object to the number of units or the density in this location. But I do believe that we ask the neighborhood associations to adopt small area plans for a reason. And you are going to be looking for significant variances should the heritage preservation approvals come forward. And I don't want to be fighting this out at the variance level where the standard is higher. So I'm not talking to you directly. I'm just making a point.
I just like to make one comment.
No.
As the applicant, I think I'm allowed to make comments, even after a public hearing is closed.
No, you're not.
Sir, I think I don't think you want to speak right now.
I know, but I believe I'm allowed to actually, even as an applicant, even after a public hearing
Could
is
you
closed.
please sit down? I'm happy to follow up with you after the committee meeting. But
We could be sitting here today, Madam Chair, with a room full of people opposing a development based on density, height, parking, traffic, and all of the other things we see. Instead, we have a whole room full of people who are basically saying we're good with the development if it meets these conditions. And I don't think that that's an unacceptable request at this point. The city believes in density at this site. I believe the council member of the ward does as well. And it sounds like most of the people on this panel do as well. We're concerned about what the building will look like and how it will impact the area. But most importantly, we ask these neighbors to work on these small area plans. And we want to be able to honor them. And I think that we need to do that today. So I would ask for your support.
all right. So the motion then is to grant the appeal with the conditions.
Chair Bender, I'm sorry to interrupt. The conditions of approval would result in a substantially different project, and I just want to make sure that I understand the committee's intent is that those revisions that would be made to comply with the conditions of approval would be something that staff would look at administratively and not go back to the Heritage Preservation Commission?
I would love the chair's thinking on this, but this is one tiny step. This property is zoned I-1. in order to build anything that's dense, you're going to need a lot of variances. I can see what's going to happen next, which is if you don't do these things, you're never going to get the zoning change or the variances in a way that the neighbors support. Can't read whether or not you'll get a variance, but I can read what will happen with the neighbors. So I think that we should move this forward for the staff to work this out. And I also will say, I thought Mr. Lautenschlager's comments were great. I was very impressed with the level of knowledge of the neighborhood staff, and I would encourage you to work with him as well.
Is staff comfortable with that arrangement, Mr. Wittenberg, that your suggestion that it be administratively approved? It would be helpful to know what you think of, the HPC's level of discussion and on projects in this district.
Committee members, the types of changes, the scope of the changes that we're talking here would normally be something that would go back for review by the Heritage Preservation Commission. But certainly you have the ability in this action to make those conditions of approval something that would just be reviewed at the staff level.
Madam Chair, I'm okay if it doesn't go back through the HPC. They're not going to like anything that's tall in this location, so we know what the result's going to be. So we're trying to get to yes on building a highly dense project in a location where there's a support for density with a sensitivity to the character of the neighborhood. And I don't want to, my intent's not to try to stop them from doing something, but to try to make it more aligned with the neighborhood.
Absolutely. Okay. I agree. Does anyone else want to make a comment? So I just want to say I also appreciate so much that the neighbors came with such a detailed and thoughtful proposal of how to move this project forward. Honestly, the response from the development team made me consider just moving to deny the application completely, because what needs to happen for this PUD to be successful is more communication and collaboration with the neighbors who are ready, again, to accept a very significant change in an historic district. And so, I was sort of going back and forth as you were speaking, so just please take to heart, that in order to have this PUD approved and this project go forward, when the next step comes with the land use applications, that we're going to need to be able to hear from the neighbors that they're comfortable with the project. So is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. We are now on item 3. Thank you all for your patience. So that we'll begin with our staff presentation. This is a conditional use permit and site plan review for 2614 Harriet. And this would be a new 3-story building there.
Good morning, Chair Bender and committee members. My name is Mei-Ling Smith. I'm representing CPED. And this presentation is for an appeal of a project that was approved by the City Planning Commission at their October 16th meeting. It affects 4 parcels located in the Linden Hills neighborhood. The subject site is zoned R4, and it's also located within the Shoreland Overlay District. It's 1 block east of the 43rd and Sheridan neighborhood commercial node. And the surrounding area contains a wide variety of uses and residential densities. And of course, there's the commercial node that contains most of the commercial uses in the neighborhood. Lake Harriet is 380 feet to the east. Here's an aerial view of the subject site. The existing site is bounded on the north by a curved alley, and it faces 44th Street to the south. As you can see, there's an existing 1-story or 1.5-story bungalow that's part of the development site. And as a result of that, because there are more than 2 residential structures proposed on the site, it came in as a cluster development. So as I mentioned, it's a conditional use permit to allow a cluster development. The applicant's proposal also was to increase the maximum height allowed in the shoreland overlay district and for a cluster development above 2.5 stories. The applicant's proposal was for a 4-story building. Site plan review is required for the new building and then a preliminary and final plat. Here's the site plan. You can see that the new residential building would be along the west property line, and then the existing bungalow would remain in the southeastern portion of the site. And there's also a 10-space surface parking lot along the alley. Here are the elevations from 44th Street and also from the alley, showing the garage door. This is the view from the east. So this is the elevation that would be facing Lake Harriet per se, you know, in theory. So that would be near the east property, or face towards the east property line. And this would be the elevation view from the west property line. Here is a cross section that shows the underground parking area. And the proposed materials for the development would be hand-laid brick primarily, and also glass. So the City Planning Commission did approve this project at their October 16th meeting. They approved the conditional use permit from 2.5 stories to 3 stories, not the 4 stories that was requested by the applicant. So this results in a building that would be 11 feet shorter than what was requested originally, and that would be a 1/2 story taller than what is allowed by right in the Shoreland Overlay District and as for cluster development. And then the City Planning Commission also attached several conditions of approval that relate mostly to landscaping and screening of the surface parking area and around the site, and also making sure that there are sufficient windows on the ground floor elevation. The applicant has appealed the City Planning Commission's decision to approve the 3-story building. As I mentioned before, they want a 4-story building that would be 53 feet and 10 inches tall. So a conditional use permit is required because of both the Shoreland Overlay District requirements and the cluster development standards. The maximum allowed height in the base zoning district is 4 stories, 56 feet. But because of the overlay districts, it requires a conditional use permit to approve an increased height. And I just wanted to go over what the purpose is of the Shoreland Overlay District. And this is directly from the zoning code. It's established to preserve and enhance the environmental qualities of surface waters and the natural and economic values of shoreland areas within the city, to provide for the efficient and beneficial utilization of those waters and shoreland areas, to comply with the requirements of state law regarding the management of shoreland areas, and to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. And here's where the Shoreland District appears throughout the city. So it's 1,000 feet from the ordinary high water mark of all of our lakes, ponds, and wetlands. And then it's within 300 feet from our rivers. So you can see it's throughout the city, widespread. And here's where the subject site falls within the Shoreland Overlay District in this particular area of the city, which you can see in the orange. So I'm just going to summarize our staff findings and the findings that were adopted by the City Planning Commission. So one category of findings that we look at is the context of the conditional use permit request. So staff found that, and the City Planning Commission found that there are varying building heights and densities and uses in the area. As you may remember from the aerial, there are commercial buildings and also high density residential buildings in the surrounding area. And because of the variation of the grade in the natural grade of this particular area, the proposed building would actually be shorter than some of the other multifamily buildings within a block as measured above sea level, and the applicant has submitted some exhibits that show this. The existing 3- and 4-story buildings within a block actually exceed the 2.5 stories that's the height requirement for the Shoreland Overlay District, and would be taller than the proposed building at 4 stories. So here's an exhibit provided by the applicant that shows where the proposed development would appear in relation to other buildings in the area. Here's another view. And here's a cross section of 44th Street on the bottom image. There's a rendering of the proposed development and then the other variation of residential buildings on that same block. And then there's also, if you turn the corner, there are other fairly tall single-family homes as well along Lake Harriet Parkway. In addition to approve the conditional use permit for height, we look at what is the impact of the overall height of the building. So staff found that additional height would not prove detrimental to the public health, safety, or general welfare, or be injurious to other property or be injurious to other property in the vicinity. So the proposed building is a very narrow profile. It's 51 feet wide, and the entire lot is 105 feet wide. And because of this narrow profile, it helps to minimize the impact of shadowing and just the overall impact, visual impact on other properties in the area. The staff report also notes that the proposed building would be 65 feet from the property across the alley to the north, 28 feet from the single family home to the west, and 140 feet from the property to the east. However, staff did find that there are some general impacts staff found that because of the overall height of the building at 4 stories, and then combining this with the overall length of the building, which is 151 feet along the east and west property lines, this could result in some negative impacts to properties. So that's why the staff recommendation was for 3 stories, and the City Planning Commission adopted that and also approved the building at 3 stories. And also the Shoreland Overlay District, whenever we look at approving a conditional use permit or analyzing a conditional use permit for height, we look at what the impact to the shoreland will be. And some of the findings don't apply directly because the proposal is not connected to the protected water of Lake Harriet. There is a finding that there be limited visibility of the structure from the protected water. It's not that it has to be invisible, but that there is limited visibility. And staff found that there would be very limited visibility because of the distance from the protected water, and also because of the presence of trees and public streets and other residential structures in between the subject site and the protected water. I wanted to mention that Minnehaha Creek Watershed District provided a letter that you may have seen in your packets, and they suggested that the applicant provide full stormwater mitigation on the site, and the applicant has provided a plan that shows that stormwater would be fully mitigated, even though this site is not subject to the stormwater mitigation requirement because it's under an acre. And here's again where the site falls in relation to Lake Harriet. And here's a view looking toward the site from the Lake Harriet Parkway. So the Linden Hill Zoning and Planning Committee is in opposition to the conditional use permit for height request, and the East Calhoun Community Organization's Livability Committee also is in opposition to the height request. You've received numerous comments in opposition, but also in support of the conditional use permit for height, both for the 3- and 4-story proposal. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? There aren't. Okay, so we will go ahead and start the public hearing. I think it would be helpful to hear from the applicant first in this case as well, and then we'll move from there.
Hi, thank you, council members. Andrew Commerce and I are partners on this development, and thank you for your time. One thing I wanted to touch on very quickly, because I know you've had a long day and a lot going on, is our background, just that Andrew has worked for ArtSpace for 10 years before going on his own. I've done a lot of development that is adaptive reuse. And I think one of the things that I think we face as developers, especially trying to do things in a neighborhood like this, I've lived in Linden Hills across the street for 23 years, directly across the street from this, is there's a perception that developers come in and they take something neutral or good and make it neutral or horrible. And we spent our entire careers and every cent of our money trying to do beautiful, thoughtful projects. This site, if we were just doing a by right development, we could squash, 21 units at 2.5 stories, and it would be, in my opinion, horrible. Instead, we've hired Snow Carlick Architects and Julie Snow herself design this, and the intent was to not only create light and air as we go up, but as we go across. So what you see is a 4-story building, 2 units per floor, and then we're keeping the bungalow as part of the condominium units. So it's basically 9 units, but given the amount of land, there's just a tremendous amount of light and air as it fills in that space. So today, the issue really is the shoreland overlay. We need a conditional use permit for the cluster, but we don't have to cluster this. We could change the design and not cluster, so it would still come back to shoreland overlay. And Carol Lansing, we're going to ask Carol Lansing just to touch on those points because they're very important to us. And I think as Mei Ling has pointed out, it's a 2.5 story unless you seek and are granted a higher use. But the critical part there is there's many overlays in our city that are particular to an area, like the Harmon overlay and those kind of things. This is a statewide initiative that is intended for the entire state. So if you're in a quiet river on the St. Croix or something, you don't see a 4-story building hanging out right on the shoreline. We're in an urban context, and so we already have buildings that are there. And so it's like, how do you appropriately balance that? Well, the test is from the water. And given that we are on a hill and the house on the corner as you head towards 44th, the corner of 44th Street is actually elevated higher on its land, it's not something you can see from the lake or the middle of the lake. Even if you go all the way across the lake, you might see this, but in the context of much taller buildings. So looking to that test, we've done as thoughtful a job as we could possibly do. The site for us, the reason we're requesting 4 stories is it's not viable at 3 stories. So whatever would happen next, we don't know, but it wouldn't be something we could just make work like that. And we wouldn't be the developers who would do the 2.5 story thing that just sprawls out over the whole deal. So I think, Andrew, did you want to touch on one thing?
Yeah, I just have a brief minute. Good morning, I'm Andrew Commerce. We've been working on this project for 18 months, and I'm really excited about it, enthused to have the opportunity before you today to request a recommendation for council approval. Not just for 3/4 of a project, which cannot be done, but for the whole project. An approval condition to 3 stories is really a denial because it is not economically feasible. The shoreline overlay does not prohibit buildings over 2.5 stories. It allows requests for height greater than 2.5 stories to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis under the criteria for a CUP. Our proposed 4-story building meets those criteria, which, as John mentioned, Carol will go through in more detail. People have argued that to approve the requested CUP would be changing the rules for the developer, and that simply is not the case. It isn't a change in the rules, it is following the rules to approve a CUP for a project that meets the CUP criteria. Also, briefly, we took stormwater mitigation very seriously. With our proposed system, the runoff rates will be less than the existing rates. We will increase on-site filtration. The system is sized to hold in excess of 1 inch of runoff rain volume from all impervious surfaces. And in other words, our project improves the situation, keeping the lake clean. One last thing just on the site plan, when we're looking at that, there are a few pieces that we've tried to really do, address trees and other green stormwater elements. The parking in the back is just a nod to the fact that the street and the area is very busy, and those parking spaces would be for guests who are coming to visit or for slight overflow of the parking that we've already built under the building. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lansing.
Good morning, council members. I'm Carol Lansing. I'm an attorney at Faegre Baker Daniels, 90 South 7th Street. I want to give you some exhibits and review the criteria for CUP, or the key ones here. Some of this builds on what Andrew and John were talking about. First, this is the zoning map for this area, and this is a distinct and sizable area of higher density zoning on Lake Harriet. It is not something that exists around the lake. This is the site, and the proposed building would be on this inner lot. You can see that there's quite a lot of R4 and R5 near it. Approval of a 4-story building is, in this context, is consistent with the zoning and the character of the area, and that's not something that would happen, though, around the rest of the lake. Many projects in shoreland areas in the city have been approved at 6 and 7 stories, and these are not all on commercial corridors. And we're not asking for 6 and 7 here. That wouldn't be appropriate in this context. We're only asking for 4. We went through all the criteria for a CUP in our letter, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to focus on the key ones. And I think the first one is visibility from the lake, really kind of sums up most people's concerns. And Mei Ling went over the purpose of the shoreland. It's about environmental protection, protection of the water quality, and we are doing that with erosion control and stormwater management. And it's about the experience of people from the lake. Shoreland standards, as she said, don't require new construction to be invisible, only that it be visibility be limited. So wanted to show you some of the exhibits we've put in the packet that talk about visibility. This is from the west shore, and because of the topography going up, there's hillsides, a lot of vegetation and other development that rises. This is one place where if you peek through, right here, we're showing a rendering of the building. If you were standing over here, you wouldn't see it at all. Same with other locations. But here you can just see it, and you can't see the top of it because of existing vegetation. This is a view from, a couple of views from sort of the middle and across the lake in photographic versions. It would be right in here. You can see from the distance where you could start seeing this building, it would blend in quite a bit and not be the tallest thing you see. And then also in your packet is this exhibit, which shows you sight lines from different places on and across the lake. And these show that most of them, your views are going to be blocked by existing vegetation and by other existing development. But even if you could, if there was nothing in between it, the most that would be visible would be just a small portion of the top of the building. So to the extent that this building is visible, it will be minimal. CUP standards also evaluate impact on surrounding properties. I think it's important to note that the height limits of the shoreland aren't intended to provide more benefits to neighboring properties than exist elsewhere in the city. They're focused on shoreland impacts. And by this, I mean R1 properties exist next to R4 throughout the city, and no CUP would be required for a 4-story building just because it's next to a R1 district. But one of the standards that address impacts of surrounding buildings are not being injurious to surrounding properties and being part of the orderly and normal development permitted in the area. And the CPED report noted several factors why this is consistent with that CUP finding. Natural grade and other development is in the area is consistent. There are several other 4-story and some 3-story buildings in the area. The change of elevation makes this not the tallest thing you would see in terms of elevation. So it is consistent with those findings, and I'd like to note that the staff report specifically said the development wouldn't compromise the shoreland area. There's also CUP standards relating to access to light and air, and this exhibit is included in your packet to show that with this being the proposed development, just how separated it is from the R1 zone, which is both single family and multiple family homes, other apartment buildings in the area. So there's quite a lot of distance and separation between what's proposed here and surrounding properties. There'll be no negative impacts on access to light and air. And the staff report also noted that the shadowing will be minimal. Again, that's due to the narrow north-south orientation and this separation. We've talked, there's a standard about scale and character of surrounding development, and I think we've talked about that quite a bit. And it won't block any views of landmark buildings, significant open spaces, or water bodies. So in conclusion, just wanted to echo what Andrew said, that this is not a situation where you're changing the rules. It is following the rules to grant a CUP for a proposal that meets the criteria in the ordinance, and this project is at 4 stories, consistent with all of those criteria. So we do urge you to grant the appeal and approve this project as proposed.
Thank you.
Ms. Snow is here if there's any other questions, or the development team is happy.
Are there any other questions right now? Imagine maybe we'll ask at the end as well. Okay, so let's move on to the rest of the public hearing. Excuse me. Similar to before, we have each of you come up, maybe the first person have a little extra time, but then from there we'll do 2 to 3 minutes per person.
Good morning. My name's Lauren Mecha. I live at 4334 West Lake Harriet Parkway. My property is immediately adjacent to this development to the east. Okay. Let's see. Okay. The test is from the water. That's what I just heard. The test is from the water. Well, this is the water. This is Lake Harriet. And I'll step over here. This is my home at 4334 West Lake Harriet Parkway. It's a 2-story home. We don't even have a 2.5-story. There isn't an attic. That's a 2-story home. The proposed building, they're calling it 4 stories. That is a misnomer. The lower level is 11 feet, 8 inches. That is 4 inches shy of a full story. So what they're referring to as a 4-story building is actually, practically speaking, a 5-story building directly behind my home. So, let's see. So if you can imagine my 2-story home with all of these trees coming down as part of their plan, look how visible that's going to be from the lake. A 2-story home's visible from the lake, a 5-story that high. So if we're going to say that the test is from the water, here you have it. I'm a sailor, I'm a kayaker, I'm a runner. Lake Harriet is critical not only to my daily life, but also to my family's financial well-being. We have invested in this property. And there is going to be a looming 5-story structure proposed behind us. That seems like a gross abuse of the Shoreland Overlay District's intentions. They refer to the building as being light and airy, and it really is quite lovely, I have to say. However, the floor-to-ceiling windows, floor-to-ceiling, on the east-facing side, all they look into is my backyard. And with my 3 kids and 2 dogs, I'm not sure that's the view that they're going for unless they have that full 5-story building. I want you to know, please, that I am in support of development. I enjoy what's happening in Linden Hills. And I am in full support of responsible development that adheres to the Shoreland Overlay District recommendations. This is not high-density housing. This is not affordable housing. This is luxury housing that is going in.
And this is luxury housing that will be visible above this tree line here from the lake. And I ask you to please consider that as you decide on the height of this project.
Thank you. The next speaker, please.
Good morning. My name is Lori Bushbaum, and I live at 4249 Linden Hills Boulevard. I've been a 20-year homeowner there. I'm about 3 blocks away from the proposed building. As the woman who spoke before me, who I do not know, I wish that what was going into this area was affordable housing. We know the city of Minneapolis is in a crisis of affordable homes, that we've lost about 10,000 affordable home units. We need to be building affordable housing. We do not need more luxury homes in Linden Hills. We need to make this area accessible. Aside from that, I oppose any additional increase in the height because I think it's out of scale. Through the neighborhood area plan, the neighbors of Linden Hills have spent hundreds of hours articulating the vision for our neighborhood. The city staff has given its recommendations to keep this at 3 stories. I oppose the sense of entitlement by the developers that their financial gain on this development of luxury homes take precedence over the Overland Shore District, the city staff's recommendation, and the neighborhood vision. I do also understand that the city of Minneapolis has made a commitment to more housing density. Each neighborhood will have to do its part. I prefer that this was affordable housing. But the building as recommended by city staff at 3 stories already has significant density. That seems like a reasonable compromise to me. Just because the Overland Shore District has been violated by other buildings in the area does not mean it should be violated yet again. I accept the building, though I don't love it. I accept the building as approved by the city staff and oppose any additional height request. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next person, please. Would anyone else like to speak?
Good morning. My name's Pepper Tharp. I'm a Linden Hills resident, and I would like to ask you, if I could, how many, I saw in the packet out there, about 60 articulate letters in opposition of this. Maybe there was 3 in support. So I'm wondering if you all have taken into consideration what the neighborhood has asked, what the planning and zoning from Link, which is a recognized charter, you know, what the neighborhood has asked you to do. And much like the wonderful gentleman of the National Park Service, our city lakes are gems. They're a vision of our designer, Frederick Law Olmsted, and I don't believe that it is our job to find loopholes to ruin a vision and something that is so precious, that it seems to be a theme throughout all of us here, that these things are, we value them, we've worked on them, we're stewards of them, and to just let an economic advantage for a few citizens kind of trump the health of our neighborhood. I just really want you to consider that. And I really do think it is injurious in so many ways, that this building is simply not fitting. And anyways, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next person, please. Would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? How many more people would like to speak? Okay.
I'll be quick. My name is Kelly Noble. I live at 4340 West Lake Area Parkway. I am immediately east of the property. I have a couple things that I want to reiterate. And I guess I'd be remiss if I wasn't up here to say that I'm in opposition to the height The developers have a right to build a multi-use building or multi-dwelling unit on that space. I know that. I bought my house knowing that. The developers also bought that property knowing that there were restrictions on that space. And they have presented absolutely nothing except their own saleability and their own profitability as reasons for why they should be allowed to have this increase in height. I think their building is beautiful. I especially appreciate that they've left the bungalow in place. That's a beautiful, beautiful home. And it would be a tragedy for that to be torn down. They can tear it down if they want. But what happens for me personally, I'll get personal for a minute, the building will look directly into my backyard, directly. I am immediately behind it. And then lighting and other things will also impact the livability of my house and the saleability of my house. So I'd be lying if I didn't have a vested interest in this. I do. The other buildings that are in the area were all, to the best of my knowledge, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, that exceed the Shoreland Overlay District heights were all in place before the Shoreland Overlay District was promulgated. And there's a reason it was promulgated. If we continue to make exceptions to it, the west side of Lake Harriet, the Linden Hills area will look like the north end of Lake Calhoun in no time. Now it's a pristine, fairly pristine anyway, shoreland, and I'd like to see it stay that way. I ask that the committee protect the Shoreland Overlay District as it's written, and at a minimum, approve the compromise that the City Planning Commission put in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next person, please.
Good morning. My name is Bill Carnes. I live at 4344 West Lake Harriet Parkway. I am also directly adjacent to this project, and I just like to make a couple comments in addition to what the other folks have said. I am in opposition to the appeal. I think the Shoreland Overlay District is important, and I think the staff did a great job of coming up with a compromise between what the developer is requesting and what the Shoreland Overlay District mandates. I just like to emphasize a couple things. One is that this project is a precedent-setting proposal. No project of this height, this close to Lake Harriet, has been built since the Shoreland Overlay District was instituted in the 80s. So this will set a precedent. Right now, along 44th Street, coming west from the intersection with West Lake Harriet Parkway, we have a single-family home, another single-family home, the proposed development, and there's a single-family home, a low-level fourplex, and then a taller fourplex, which is 913 feet above sea level. Across the street from this development, again, coming west from West Lake Harriet Parkway along 44th Street, there's one multi-unit building on the corner there, and then it's single-family home, single-family home, single-family home, single-family home, single-family home. And then you cross the street, and there's two more single-family homes. My point is that this building, this proposal, is out of scale for the immediate vicinity. For those of us who live directly next to or within the area, the fact that there is a 7-story building up on the hill in the commercial district is fairly irrelevant. When we look at what is within our vicinity, this will be way out of scale. It'll be 14 feet taller than that one building that's 913 feet above sea level. And it will be, I don't know the exact numbers, but it'll be about twice as close to Lake Harriet as that building. Another thing I would like to emphasize is, according to the actual Shoreland Overlay District wording, one of the items that is to be considered, and you probably already know this, but I just like to emphasize it, one of the points to emphasize is that the scale and character of surrounding uses is to be considered when you're determining a proposal of development. In addition to being able to, whether or not you can see the building from the water, the scale and character of surrounding uses is to be considered. I think this building, so much taller than those of us that surround it, violates that principle. It's not to scale and it's out of character with the other buildings. Other thing I'd like to point out is that this block, I'm pretty sure this block contains the densest development of any block in Linden Hills already, even with the tear down of the single family home that was on this property. I think this block already is the densest development in the neighborhood.
Okay.
Those of us who live there don't object to density, but this particular project, as tall as it is not the way to get that density.
Thank you, sir. If you could just wrap up with a couple final thoughts. I think we're pretty clear on the position of the neighbors.
All right, yeah, let me just check.
Just if there's anything we haven't heard yet. And
I think, okay, I'll stop.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank
Would
you.
anyone else like to speak? Sure, come on up. We have two more items, so I just want to make sure we still have
Take long.
No problem.
My name is Larry Lockman. I live at 2605 West 44th Street, across the street from this project. I live with my friends, and I appreciate their concerns, and I don't disagree with their concerns. I do want to indicate that how the shoreline overlay rules or whatever are being used are wrong. They were started in 1980. My home was built in 1986 and is clearly visible from the lake. In addition, it's part of a condo association. The third floor at 4400 Lake Harriet Parkway was also built in 1986 and is visible from, anywhere on the lake. So visibility, land use, all of that has nothing to do with this project. Aesthetics, privacy, all that, I have no quarrel with people's complaints about that. I don't agree with them, but you can't use the shoreland overlay as an excuse for denying this. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anything else? Anyone else like to speak? Would the team like to respond to anything? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Is there a motion on this item? Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to move to deny the appeal. I think the compromise by staff was the right decision. I do think the building is beautiful, and I like modern architecture a lot, and I think that does fit into the area, but I just think it's simply too big in the sightline, and I think the staff came to a very elegant compromise, and the Planning Commission concurred with it, and I would urge us to uphold those decisions.
Is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. Thank you for everyone who came. I wanted to note that Councilmember Palmisano is here. She's not on the committee, but your council members are here tracking this for you. So that brings us to item number 4. That's an interim use permit on behalf of Minnehaha Academy. I will start with a staff presentation. Welcome, Ms. Walls.
Good morning, council members. The application before you today is an interim use permit for the South Campus of Minnehaha Academy, located at 4200 West River Parkway. You may be familiar that the North Campus of Minnehaha Parkway, located at 3100 West River Parkway, experienced a gas explosion on August 2nd, 2017, which rendered the building unusable for the school year. All the classes that were located at the building have been relocated to a temporary campus. The application for the interim use permit is to allow temporary office pod to be placed on the South Campus to provide space for 19 administrative offices. There's not space for administrative offices in the temporary school building or the existing building on the site. The zoning for the area is R1, single family with the Mississippi River and Shoreland overlay districts. The site is occupied by the existing building, an ice arena, baseball field, tennis courts, and a football and track field. The site is over 12 acres in size, so it's quite substantial. The site has gone through site plan review process as part of other land use applications in both 2006 and 2009. So here is a photo of the site. It's right at East 42nd Street and West River Parkway. So the applicant has proposed to construct a temporary office pod, which would be constructed out of 5 office trailers. They would be approximately 3,300 square feet in size and would have space for 19 administrative offices. There would be an accessible entrance and 2 accessible restrooms. And the applicant has proposed the interim use permit for 5 years, and the pods have actually already been constructed on the site. So here is a photo of the existing building and the pod structure. Here's a closer view of the structure. As you can tell, they're located quite close to the public sidewalk, and in fact, the office pod encroaches into the public right-of-way about 1.6 feet. So the applicant would need to acquire an encroachment permit from Public Works in order to allow the current placement of the pod. So if this was a permanent use, it would require variances both for the front yard setback, as it's located entirely in the required front yard, and due to the fact that all the mechanical equipment for the pod is facing the public street and does not comply with our mechanical screening requirements. However, since this is a temporary use, the City Council can waive some of those requirements, finding that the temporary use will eliminate the adverse effects. So staff has found that the proposed temporary offices would take up a relatively small portion of a large lot. Staff has recommended conditions of approval that the office pod will need to be reviewed by City of Minneapolis plan review staff to determine that the pod is a state licensed modular building. They will also need to apply for an encroachment permit from Public Works. And staff finds that the traffic impacts of the temporary structure would be minimal and would not add to the minimum required parking for the site. And as I mentioned previously, it does not comply with 2 requirements of the zoning code, including the front yard setback and mechanical screening requirements. And so staff is recommending a condition of approval to require landscaping around all 4 sides to mitigate the aesthetic impact. Staff also finds that the proposal for the interim use for 5 years was excessive, as the applicant expects all the renovations to the North Campus to be completed within 3 years. So staff is recommending approval of the interim use permit for 3 years. And I will stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and move this. Oh, sorry, we have a public hearing. I'll open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak in the public hearing? Anyone like to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to go ahead and move approval of the staff recommendations on this, and just say that this has been a horrible tragedy within the community. And it's been amazing to see the community really come together, and we understand the need for these temporary pods. And I know it's not ideal and it's not pretty, but it's something that needs to be done. while we support our neighbors and help get this great asset in the community back up on its feet. And hopefully it's rebuilt stronger than it was before, and the community comes out stronger than it was before. So I appreciate everyone's work on this and understanding, and look forward to getting through this hard time.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Just underscore everything that Councilmember Johnson just said, and our thoughts have been with the community. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. Then we have one final item, which is on this, pulled from consent, which is the exterior building materials ordinance. Let's start with a presentation from staff. While staff is setting up, I'll just note, so I am the author of this ordinance change, which is focused on codifying the guidelines that we currently use for exterior building materials. Having served on the Planning Commission for the past 4 years, I've seen that our projects across the city have quite a large variety of building materials. And one thing that happens is that in the more wealthy areas, particularly where neighbors are very organized, we often end up requiring buildings to be like all brick and like very beautiful, high quality materials. And in lower income parts of the city or places where the market isn't as strong, we get far less quality materials. And so one of the goals of this ordinance was actually responding to concerns after we reformed the parking requirements to make sure that we have more consistency about development standards and quality in all neighborhoods of the city, regardless of the income and context of the neighborhoods, and making sure that we're not getting such a difference of materials in different neighborhoods. So with that, I'll have staff.
Thank you, Chair Bender, committee members. I know we're short on time, so I didn't know if there were specific questions that we wanted to answer, if you wanted to provide a background on the process.
I think just a few minutes of background would be helpful.
Sure,
I mean, I think
absolutely.
5 minutes or whatever.
So as Councilmember Bender mentioned, this amendment is growing out of a period of significant growth in the city, significant development over the past 5 years, including over $1 billion in construction permits. In addition to that, we've engaged in a significant amount of zoning deregulation as a department to both facilitate that development, but also to achieve some other policy goals, including eliminating conditional use permits for multiple family dwellings, eliminating residential density requirements for higher density residential districts, parking policy reform in order to reduce the required amounts of parking for larger projects that are within close proximity to transit. And then, of course, ongoing project allowances in the form of variances, conditional use permits for height, all of which have resulted in both significant increased development capacity and density in the city, and also significant gains for developers who are working within the city. A lot of this development obviously has been focused on multiple family development. As a result of that, 3 years ago, the city and CPED worked to develop some materials guidance based on a stipulation in our site plan review regulations that calls for materials to be durable. And we've been implementing that guidance for the last few years on larger scale projects that are subject to site plan review. This is what that looks like today. As you'll note, there are material percentages allowed for individual material types. And as Councilmember Bender mentioned, there is a desire to provide some additional both clarity and certainty by codifying this guidance into our site plan review requirements rather than having it as sort of a secondary document to site plan review, and also to make it a little bit more easy to use and digestible. As we're aware, there's a lot of new architectural technology, material technology emerging in the marketplace. And so there was also a desire to understand some of the impacts of those newer technologies on recent development within the last 20 years. We've also seen some significant challenges, failures, issues with certain materials, viewed both in terms of research that staff has done, site visits, and also in projects that are coming through that were approved within the last 15 or 20 years for replacement of exterior building materials based on a number of different reasons, but that was brought into our analysis and helped form the basis for our conclusions. The staff report outlines some of the evaluation criteria that we use to establish a materials classification system, which consists of 3 classes of materials. So instead of assigning a percentage to each material, we're now grouping them into 3 different categories based on durability, aesthetic compatibility, and then those classes are allowed in certain percentages based on building type and on scale. And this is coming out of a lot of discussion with our development partners, affordable housing colleagues, and architectural partners. That particularly with the scale question, there are certain economies of scale, especially in the affordable housing industry, that allow for a higher degree of high quality building materials on larger scale projects. Additionally, those projects have a higher impact, a higher public impact. And so that was one reason for making that distinction. A really important and critical element to the site plan review chapter to understand in this context is the alternative compliance allowance, which allows for a great degree of flexibility on the part of the City Planning Commission and staff to recommend alternative methods of meeting the intent and spirit of the zoning ordinance through some proposal that does not exactly conform to the site plan review standards. This would apply to exterior building materials. It's an alternative compliance category that is routinely granted in applications, and would allow for the possibility that a designer or developer might come up with a material solution or material product that we're unfamiliar with, and that they then can demonstrate that that product or design solution meets the intent of our standards. So with that, I can take any questions that the committee has.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Okay.
I don't have any questions. I want to make some changes.
So, Councilmember Goodman, I understand has some changes to propose. I think it'd be helpful to hear what they are, and then I would actually like to ask staff to respond and just help us understand how that fits into the long conversation that's happened.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I don't really want to be the expert on rain screens as it pertains to fiber cement board. And I think this is something that probably should have been handled at the staff level, but has not been handled at the staff level to the satisfaction of many of the players, including those at MCCD who have contacted me with regard to the additional cost for affordable housing developers. So I would like to make the following change. I would like to, under section 530.125 exterior materials, under section 1, class 1, item G, remove the word rain screen. Under section 2, class 2, eliminate single skin metal panel siding. And also under section C, remove the word rain screen. And then lastly, change item C, where it says, where feasible, exterior materials shall be installed with a rain screen principles to mitigate moisture, substitute the word all materials shall be installed to manufacturer specifications. And I would like to be able to speak to why I'm suggesting this.
Sure, go ahead.
I don't want to be the expert on rain screens, and I love hardy board siding, and I have it on my house, and I've had it on a previous house I've built too. So, but there are products other than hardy board, and those products other than hardy board have a different way of dealing with rain, and they can use some sort of underlayer dappling to be able to move rain away. And I just don't think it makes a lot of sense for us to choose our friends at hardy board over someone else by saying rain screens are more important than dappling. I absolutely agree with the chair that we cannot have a situation where in wealthy parts of town, everything is all brick. In other places, it's EFIS or something that's not good. But I have been hearing about this from Jim Roth, Rose Tang, Becky Landon, people who I respect in the affordable housing community who have concerns about treating products one as preferential over another. And in this situation, I would have wanted to see this worked out by staff, but it sounds like there's just not going to be a way to get it worked out by staff. I appreciate the fact that Mr. Crandall said that there's going to be alternative compliance, but if the alternative compliance doesn't work, then they're going to be coming to us anyway. I want to avoid that because I don't want to be contradicting what staff has negotiated with regard to additional compliance. So I think that this should solve the problem of not picking one kind of product over another while still maintaining a very legitimate moisture mitigation solution. There are products that have different kinds of moisture mitigation than rain screens, and I think we have to take those into consideration.
Okay, thank you. Do you have the proposal enough to respond to the changes?
Yeah, I think I understand, Chair Pender.
So I think it'd be helpful just for you to give us your perspective from all the conversations you've had about the changes.
Sure. So with regard to rain screen as language in the proposed text amendment, I just want to be clear, rain screen doesn't actually refer to a specific product or product line. It's a architectural principle that it's a design principle by which an exterior building material is held away from the surface of the interior wall assembly. There's usually a moisture barrier on the exterior of that wall assembly, and it allows for air to enter the wall system and thereby eliminate any moisture that might build up in that gap over time. And that can be achieved, as Councilmember Goodman noted, in any number of ways by any number of different material manufacturers. We're not trying to say that James Hardie is the only, rain screen product. Now,
Mr. Crandall, but they are the only. But there are other products that don't use rain screen that use dappling, and you don't give any consideration for that in this. So you are essentially saying Hardie is the one you should use because you don't take into consideration those that use dappling.
Chair Bender, Councilmember Goodman, I would actually argue that the system you're referring to is a rain screen system. The dappling that certain products employ as a additional layer between the fiber cement and the exterior sheathing of the building material is a rain screen system.
Well, perfect. Then we should have no disagreement. Then by changing this language to take out the word rain screen and just acknowledging that there has to be a moisture mitigation effort and it could be rain screen or dappling would satisfy those that use the product that is dappling. So I don't understand what the pushback is.
I guess, Chair Bender, Councilmember Goodman, what I'm saying is that the word rain screen as it's written in the text amendment actually captures what you're talking about.
They don't believe it does, though. So let's clarify. What's the problem with clarifying if it means the same thing? This is what they're bumping up against with you that we can't get resolved.
Right. And I just to clarify too, there is significant pressure from folks who, like a number of planning commissioners are unhappy even with the staff proposal as it is now because they feel it doesn't go far enough to enhance the materials on buildings that they're seeing coming through. So I think staff has been trying to balance these two pretty strong opinions from both sides about concerns over low quality buildings, whether they are or not, that is the stated concern, versus making sure that we're not creating barriers for affordable housing. So it's not that staff isn't responding at all. They're hearing different things from different stakeholders.
Yeah, and I would also additionally point out.
But I'm not suggesting we shouldn't get to a conclusion to address what you're raising.
Sure, Chair Bender. I would also point out that the proposal before you today represents a quite dramatic departure from where we've been implementing material regulations for the last few years. We've been limiting most fiber cement products to only 30% of building elevations. The proposal before you today would allow 100% fiber cement on larger scale projects, and we just want to ensure that the language we're using to regulate those materials delivers the performance criteria that will allow them to be successful over time. And we feel like rain screen is a good compromise that would allow us to do that.
So I had a follow-up question on that point because, again, having attended I don't know how many planning commission meetings, it is very common for neighbors to come in and oppose a full side of a product that isn't brick or something that they perceive to be a higher quality material. Since we're now codifying what used to be a suggested approach to building materials, what is our opportunity to make those changes in response to neighbors if it's in code? So if our zoning code says you can do 100% of these materials on a side of a building, and neighbors come in and say, we want this building to be brick, how have we now changed our opportunity to influence the building materials in response to neighborhood concerns?
Chair Bender, committee members, I believe that the Planning Commission and or Zoning and Planning Committee could still condition projects based on other site plan review criteria or adopted city policy with regard to exterior building materials as a condition of approval. And I can be corrected on that if that's not right, but we are attempting to set up more clear expectations in the beginning of the process so that that becomes less necessary in the sort of negotiating that happens in and around land use applications and approvals at City Planning Commission.
And so I imagine too that staff's perspective includes the fact that council members often call staff and say we want different materials, and so this would in some ways weaken your ability as staff to negotiate with the developer for higher quality materials because we're lowering the initial standard.
That's right.
Okay. Mr. Wittenberg or maybe the city attorney's office can help us. This comes up so often that I just really want to be clear that how we're affecting our future ability to influence building materials.
Chair Bender, committee members, I think you asked an excellent question, and I think generally we would have a limited ability to kind of handle materials on a kind of site by site basis unless the applicant is asking for some kind of alternative compliance that is in some way tied to materials that would allow us to have greater expectations than that is actually in the ordinance. So, I mean, if a ordinance says you can have 100%, then we better have a very good reason to say that it can't be that.
Council President Johnson.
Madam Chair, what is the rationale for doing that, for going to this 100% of one material on a side? Because I share the chair's concern. I see a future where I hear everybody talking about affordable housing. I want affordable housing. It's not going to go on Lake Harriet Parkway. It's going to get built in certain parts of the city. And if we have standards that say you can build a whole site of, I know we can't do vinyl anymore, but even hardy board, which I have no problem with that product. But this is what we're going to see, and we're going to see builders coming in and building cheap buildings with absolutely no parking in neighborhoods that are impacted already. So why did we go there? I can't figure out where how did we get to this where we're going to eliminate a requirement that we have now?
Thank you, Chair Bender, Council President Johnson. That's a great question. I should point out that the original staff recommendation when this amendment went to the Planning Commission was to maintain basically the same level of allowable fiber cement. You'll note that in the staff report that is before you, with some actual additional flexibility based on the stipulations that we have in terms of implementing products with appropriate moisture mitigation, because that is the issue that fiber cement runs into, is that it is sometimes subject to moisture infiltration and failure. So we added language about rain screen design principles, thickness and density as they correlate to different systems that allow fiber cement to mitigate moisture. After adoption by the City Planning Commission, there was some additional discussion with council members, with members of the fiber cement industry, and a consensus was reached that did not comply with or did not correspond with the original staff recommendation. And that's where we came to today.
And thank you for that very diplomatic answer. I can just say, as the author of the ordinance, I heard from a number of council members that they didn't support the original proposal. So I was attempting to bring a compromise that would pass. But I have a lot of concerns about the fact that we're essentially reducing our current standard. I mean, I would be open to postponing this conversation so that we have time. I know people have been very busy lately to make sure that we're, really engaging all of the wards, particularly those that have this concern.
I would move to postpone, Madam Chair.
Is there discussion on the Council President's motion? Councilmember Goodman.
I'm going to withdraw my change motion and move and agree with the postponement.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. And this, I just want to note this conversation has been going on for a year. So thank you, staff, for all of your work. This just shows it's a tricky one. Councilmember Johnson, did you want to say something? Yep. Okay, so we have a motion to postpone. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. We are adjourned. I will be happy to follow up with everyone who came today to talk about this.
Yep.